And here we go again. Hi there. Welcome once again, everyone, to Cast Iron Wednesday. And when we're saying cast iron, yes, I guess we do mean cast iron. I figured, if nothing else, I should wear the shirt just to demonstrate how I have signed up for the Blue Meanies. So, what? We meanies only cook in Teflon pans. Is that understood, Max? No, your blueness. Anyway, other than that, as folks know, as I mentioned already on the group, this is a little awkward, but there we go. On my YouTube channel this week, we figured we would pass the time talking about one of my favorite subjects, namely, that is, of course, the cast iron pans produced by Birmingham Stove Range. And there's a funny little story to that. Actually, there are quite a few stories about that. I mean, BSR, if there's any of the vintage cast iron manufacturers that really have exploded in popularity over the past decade or so, it probably even more than Lodge cast iron, although Lodge has certainly profited from it. The one that probably has become the most known after being unknown would be BSR, Birmingham Stove Range. And I guess you could say the popularity of Birmingham Stove Range just really demonstrates how the internet has changed everything, including things like history. As far as as far as cast iron cookware is concerned, as far as antique collecting is concerned, as far as antique selling is concerned, the internet has changed everything because. I guess I should say as well, a lot of people, myself included, seem to have this real fondness for cast iron pans, in particular from Birmingham Stove Range. And I spent some time thinking about what about this company people are finding so appealing. I mean, while there are other manufacturers out there who have become more well known, when we talk about Wappick, for instance, or Martin Stove Range, or of course Wagner and Griswold are favorite, yet a lot of times people seem to perk up and pay attention when it comes to BSR in particular. And I think there are a couple of reasons for that. I would say, first of all, the fact that BSR made so many of these pans and sold them so cheap that they can be found just about anywhere, no matter where in the country you are. If you are out browsing at flea markets, antique malls, or maybe even if you have a cast iron pan handed down from your great grandmother, funny, it always seems to be great grandmother. It's never my mom. There's a pretty good chance that, I mean, yes, while you could end up with a Lodge, a lot of those pans out there were from Birmingham Stove Range. There are just so many of them out there. And of course, as you know, they're so durable, they're heavy. Most of them, not all, but most, have a nice glass smooth cooking surface. They're pretty much the epitome of what people expect in cast iron pans. And I think a lot of it also has to do with the mystery of BSR, because just up until the explosion of popularity on the internet, I mean, a lot of these pans were, quite frankly, unknown. Most people had these pans and they really had no idea where they came from or who made them. So for the longest time, especially, even if you looked on eBay, you would see a lot of unknown or unmarked cast iron pans, often saying things like vintage made in USA skillet, because the sellers really had no idea who it was. And a lot of the research that has revealed the history of Birmingham Stove Range, the internet deserves the lion's share of the credit for it. And for that, I really actually can give a lot of the credit to a Facebook group. And I'm not even talking about the cast iron cooking group, although I'm hoping that we helped. There is a Facebook group especially for collectors of BSR. Although the moderators of the group within the last couple of years have expanded that, so that the title of that group now is BSR Lodge and hammered cast iron. So, but for a good several years or so, that was specifically a group for Birmingham Stove and Range collectors, users, people to talk about and research and uncover the history. And actually, over the years, several former employees of Birmingham Stove and Range showed up and started taking part in the group. And we're talking about, like, for instance, Hugh Rushing, who was one of their major sales managers or vice presidents or something up near the end of the life of the company, or even Saunders Jones Jr., who in fact was, I believe, company. I actually honestly don't know automatically, but he was like the company president during the last decade or so of their existence. So they showed up on that Facebook group and started commenting, and they provided a lot of history as far as details about Birmingham Stove and Range cast iron. And because of that, we've been able to fill in a lot of the unknown spaces in the company's history. Not all of them, but quite a few. And so because of this, really, thanks to the internet, BSR is probably now one of the most well-known of the vintage cast iron manufacturers. So, all right. Meanwhile, let's see what we have here. We've got, hi there, everybody. Yeah, Red Dog. How's the arm doing? Well, as you can see, it looks a little discolored this week. But actually, I will say I went to see a bone specialist last Friday, and he's the one who gave me this fiberglass cast here. And they have set a date of March 12 for this thing to come off, or at least they'll check it out before taking it off. So I'm going to be like this for about the next 3 weeks or so. But hey, it's not so bad. I was in a sling until they put this thing on, and this thing kept falling out or sliding out of the sling. So I really feel that at this point there's really no reason not to just simply leave it like this, especially since this is a very sturdy cast and it definitely keeps my arm in the right position. Anyway, Papa Dan, plenty of BSR and Lodge in Louisiana, very little Martin. And Jason says, I live just outside of Birmingham and have never seen one for sale locally. Well, yeah, BSR I think BSR, because they are not quite as unknown as they used to be, I'd say a lot of people probably are snatching those pans up now. A lot of antique malls still cannot actually identify BSR, but a number of them are. And of course, on eBay now, if you do an eBay search for BSR cast iron, oh yeah, you've got tons and tons of them, and which in the eBay tradition, just about all of them are vastly overpriced. And for that reason, even though they are very common now on eBay, I do not recommend going onto eBay to buy BSR cast iron, because even though it can take some looking, you can usually, after some time and some treasure hunting, you could probably come across a BSR pan at a much better price. So as Obtruse Moose says, yeah, that's weird. I see them all over Michigan. It's one of the last places you can get for a reasonable price. Yeah, BSR was all family ever owned, even the relatives. Yeah, Lodge cast iron can probably say that as well. But nonetheless, yeah, they were a family-owned company, all right. And I guess, yeah, there's been a lot of discussion, of course, of BSR on the internet and here on YouTube as well. And so I'm hoping we can touch on a couple of subjects that really haven't been talked about very much. So, of course, as well, with my access being a little limited, some of my BSR pans, I'm afraid I'm not able to bring out onto camera here tonight. Like, for instance, in some of my previous videos, you have seen, among other things, I'm proud to own a huge number 12 Red Mountain BSR Dutch oven. But unfortunately, at the moment, I can't lift that thing. I think I can say the same thing about the sportsman deep fryer as well. So, but as I said, they do show up in my videos, and certainly I do encourage you to take a look at them. On the other hand, I have actually taken a sample of different pieces from BSR's history here. And one thing I've wanted to comment on for a long time, I mean, it's fairly well known that, in fact, the original parent company was called Atlanta Stove Works. They were founded as Atlanta Stove Works, and really their main business was producing stoves and heaters. That was really their number one reason for existence, and that was the biggest thing for them for the longest time. I'd say probably for about 2/3 of their existence, if not more. Atlanta Stove Works really was a producer of stoves. The cast iron pans were, of course, a good income generator, but really they never considered it to be their number one, primary, what's the word, reason, I guess, for doing business. They were really into selling stoves. On the other hand, there was a very good market, of course, for kitchen cookware, which is why for decades and decades they produced these pans. And that's also really the reason why they didn't even bother putting their name on their pans. And that's the reason why BSR pans were unmarked for pretty much the entire lifespan of their existence. And these days, even Saunders Jones, for instance, is still amazed that with the popularity of cast iron on the internet, BSR's cast iron skillets have really taken the center stage, and quite frankly, their stoves and their heaters have been almost forgotten. There is another Facebook group that I do encourage people to look at, and it's called Cast Iron Grill and Hibachi World. And that is especially a group for talking about and collecting and using cast iron grills. We're talking about the big backyard grills, of which BSR made quite a few of those, in fact. And the moderators of the group have some very, very excellent restored BSR grills that they use. And I'm talking about more than just the Sportsman grill. As folks know, one of Lodge's regular sellers, of course, is their Sportsman cast iron grill, or some people call it a hibachi. They never called that at Lodge, by the way. That's just a name given to them, which they don't mind it being called that. And the Sportsman grill was initially invented by BSR. And we're talking like way back in the 1930s, in fact. The legend, or at least the tales told by BSR employees, was that the BSR Sportsman grill originally started out as a sad iron heater. Yes, it was an iron heater. But one of their salespeople got the idea of actually turning it into a cooking grill, and they started it out there. And so that's where they designed the first generation of the Sportsman grill, with the grill top, and of course the oval fish fryer that goes on top. And that became a perennial regular seller, and they continue producing it throughout their entire lifespan, all the way up to the end when they went out of business and their designs were turned over to Lodge. And now the Sportsman grill is about the only piece designed by BSR. No, two pieces. The other is the Cornbread pan. But the Sportsman grill really is the piece produced by Lodge that is still a regular income generator for them, that they had acquired from BSR. But anyway, yes, they started out as Atlanta Stove Works, and as I said, they branched off and founded another company, or another foundry in Birmingham Stove Range, with the intention especially of producing cast iron cookware to supplement their stoves, and also to, yes, do a good business selling kitchen cookware as well. I mean, there certainly was a market for it. BSR pans, of course, much like Lodge pans, they went for the market of being cheap but very reliable. I mean, Wagner and Griswold went for the elite pans. BSR and Lodge, they went for the cheaper markets, as folks would point out. Wagner and Griswold were the type of pans you bought at Macy's, whereas BSR was the type of pan you bought at Woolworths. So, but hey, I mean, people went to Woolworths every day, and they bought their cookware, and so as a result, here it is right here. William Hurt, the first new pans I ever bought are BSR from the mid-1980s. And number 8 is the worst casting I've ever seen. Oh, okay, that's interesting. Do you think you could describe what was bad about the casting? I'm not dissing you on that. I mean, maybe sounds like you came across a piece with poor casting, and I'm curious as to what it was. Maybe if there were sand marks on the mold, for instance, which I think is a good way to get started on this, because let's get started here with a first generation of BSR. Let me see. How am I going to do this? Let me put this microphone down in here where you should be able to hear me all right. And here I'm hoping again that this live feed does not lock up again this week. Anyway, we've got the first generation here of the BSR, the Red Mountain series. And the reason why it was called the Red Mountain series was because of the Birmingham area. That whole area of Birmingham, in fact, is called the Red Mountain area because the whole place is rich in iron ore, and it gives a reddish tint to the dirt and the earth all around there. And so they call that place Red Mountain, and that's why the Red Mountain series was named after it. And as we know already, thanks to all of those internet videos on identifying it, the Red Mountain series, of course, just simply had the size and the mold ID number, so that this is a 7P. And the folks who really know BSR will also know that this is what they call a handwritten pan, because it does look like it would the markings were scratched in by hand. These are generally believed, we have there's no actual written evidence of this, but it's generally believed that this was probably the first generation of BSR, especially because of this, and it was probably produced maybe as early as the 1920s, but definitely up at least to the 1930s or so. And this particular pan as well has some casting flaws on it. You can see it has well at the bottom here. That's not casting flaw, that's cat hair. But yeah, as you can see on this pan, there are marks that look like cracks, but they are not cracks. That is simply what do they call it? Sand shift. That apparently the sand used to cast the mold ended up leaving these little gaps here. As a result, it looks like there are cracks on it, except those cracks do not extend all the way through the pan. This is a nice, wonderful, smooth cooking surface. And and if you come across something like this, there's absolutely no reason not to get this kind of a pan and use it. So I actually find these markings very attractive. And funny thing about this particular pan, I don't know if it just happened to be the way they cast the iron on it or something, but this is a wonderful cooker. I mean, even for cast iron, this thing does a great job. It gets blazing hot really fast and is really wonderful for cooking for that reasons. So between this and the little markings on here, I've given this pan here the nickname of Lightning because it certainly does a good job of it. One other thing about BSR that heavy-duty or hardcore collectors know, and I actually haven't looked into it very much, is that the older Red Mountain series, the ears, the little pour spouts on the side, they were actually in different sizes. Apparently, they started out, I think it's like they started out small and ended up getting larger as time went by. I've never really been satisfied with any of the pour spouts on cast iron skillets myself. I do use them, but I've never found them to be that efficient. Nonetheless, that's yet another trait in BSR that a lot of collectors look for. So, but even so, this is again, this is the first generation here of the Red Mountain series, which again was named after the Red Mountain area of Birmingham. Let me see. I am estimating that it probably by the later 1930s, almost certainly to the 1940s, they finally standardized the markings on the pan so that it is no longer handwritten. And for this reason, this is a size 3, obviously, with a G, with bolt ID of G. For that reason, I would probably date this pan from anywhere from the 1940s all the way up to the 1960s, because that's another thing, is that the Red Mountain series was officially renamed the Century series by BSR in 1957. Yet they continued producing pans with that kind of design for a good 10 years or so. It is entirely possible this may be an early Century series pan, but I have no way to confirm that. So because of that, I mean, I can only assume that this is in fact a Red Mountain series pan, which is why I usually date it anywhere from the 40s to the 60s. The change to the Century series, which we'll talk about a little later, came after they installed their automated process, their DISA manufacturing equipment in 1966. So anyway, yes, this is the later version of the Red Mountain series. And of course, this is yet another thing that the internet can definitely take credit for, and that would be, of course, the S series of the Red Mountains. These were only noticed on the BSR Facebook group, in that they started noticing that pans with this particular mark, with this space S mark on it, these are actually very slightly smaller than the regular size of pans of the BSR. It was finally determined that, in fact, BSR did produce a special series here. Nobody knows what the actual name of it was, but they call it the S, but we call it the S series. And the generally accepted theory was that, in fact, BSR was competing with a competitor. They produced these in the same size as their competitor, especially so that they could, fit the rest of the cooking sets, such as the lids and so forth, for that competitor. We don't know who they were competing with, and no, as far as we know, it was not Lodge Cast Iron. Lodge was a competitor, yes, but it was really not much of a bitter rivalry. It's more like just a business competition. So it's not like they were enemies, so to speak. They were just there, just like there were a number of companies in the cast iron cooking business. But yes, this is the S series, which in fact is just a little bit smaller than the regular size Red Mountain here. It's a little difficult with this one. And rather than keep going on and on and on, let's see what else we have. Les Bennett Jr. My first cast iron pan was a 10-inch BSR I inherited from my grandmother, and it's nearly as smooth as a Griswold. Oh, I have no doubt about that. And yeah, like I said, everybody seems to get these from their grandparents. It's never from my mom or dad anymore. Well, then again, you figure history goes is that mom and dad probably got their cast iron from their mom and dad, namely your grandparents, whereas mom and dad, on the other hand, were using aluminum and non-stick cookware. Tracy Aaron, if Lodge would produce a much better finished pan, they could open up a market that is hungry for these quality cookware. Well, that is another subject that we've talked about, and we'll talk about again when we get into Lodge cookware. The short answer is that Lodge does in fact smooth down the surface of their cookwares. No, they do not grind and polish it anymore, but they do actually smooth it down, especially so that the seasoning will stick. And that, as I said, I have covered in a little detail in previous live chats, and we'll talk about it a little more in other chats as well. Papa Dan, did BSR make a chef skillet? Yes, they did, and this was during the Century series. Again, we'll get a little bit more into the Century series later, but I'll briefly say the main reason why they installed that automated production equipment in the 60s and changed the design of their skillets is because it allowed them to vastly increase their output. And they were, I have no records as to how much more their output increased, but it was by a considerable number. I would say they would have at least doubled their output in terms of quantity. And one advantage of being able to produce pans at such a greater rate was that they were actually able to expand their line and design many more cast iron pans that they had not produced in the past, and experiment as well, produce other types of designs to see what would sell and what wouldn't. And the BSR chef skillet was one of those things they did. That reminds me of another pan I'm going to have to dig out as well, because the chef skillet and several other of the Century pans had a somewhat different design to their handle. But yes, there was a chef skillet, and it was only during the Century series. They did not produce it during the Red Mountain days. Their Red Mountain pans were very standard sized. Though, on the other hand, the standard sized Red Mountain pans also had more size numbers than the Century series did. But the patterns for the molds were much more similar. So, William Hurt. Bottom was really rough with pits and humps, unlike any I've ever seen. Tried to smooth it out, but it's no use. I figured it may have been subbed out to another foundry. Well, it's certainly possible. During the end of their existence, no doubt they unfortunately probably produced lesser quality pans as well. There have been other pans discovered by BSR collectors that they think may have been recasts, that individuals or small companies, for whatever reason, may have used BSR pans as patterns for producing their own molds, and that would have produced lower quality pans. So maybe that might be what you have, what they call a recast. Not really a counterfeit. I mean, it's not like they were trying to trick people into buying their product instead of BSR, but it's more like they just used the BSR as a pattern for it. Which pan is your favorite and why? Okay, well, I would say of the BSR series, the one I probably get the most use out of is another Red Mountain. And I've shown this in quite a few videos, including these live videos. And that, again, is this Red Mountain here. Number 8, which, as I mentioned, from the way the marks are, I'm thinking this is probably anywhere from the 40s to the 60s. But this is a good number 8, 10-inch cast iron skillet from BSR. I mean, this is a wonderful smooth cooking surface. It is it's very dense and heavy. And I've already given this thing a beating, and it's just shrugged it off and asked for more. So, I mean, really, if this is anybody's first cast iron pan that maybe you inherited from your grandmother, for instance, you've got yourself a family heirloom here, and you're certainly going to keep using that for the rest of your life, and I don't blame you one bit for that. Have you run into a BSR Red Mountain 14 mold with an offset bump under the handle, trying to figure out if it might be one of those recasts? On one hand, as far as I could tell, the quality of some BSR pans was questionable in that they were designed to be cheap. And while they did have good quality control in their pans, which is one reason why we love them, probably not as much so as, say, Griswold and Wagner. So over time, the BSR Collectors Group has seen instances of pans with these flaws that may very well have been acceptable enough, so that at the plant, at the foundry, it was probably good enough to pass their quality inspection. They just put it on the pile and start with another one. For the record, This is according to research done on the BSR group. When Atlanta Stove Works first started out initially making cast iron, they did in fact use prison labor. So I'm just bringing that up really more just to mention this as a trivia fact of history, and I'm not trying to get into any kind of politics about that. It's simply a fact that it happened. So when you consider we had workers there who essentially, they used prison labor because it was extremely inexpensive, and again, that's a subject for another time. But nonetheless, they were paid pennies, probably literally, and they were paid as well based on gross, based on the amount of pans they would produce in a day. So they would obviously want to make these things very quickly, so that they would build up a nice pile of skillets, and as such, little things probably were not a major concern. What their concern was, of course, was getting enough pans to make their quota, which would be one reason why they used those handwritten marks in their beginning for a good, I'd say, at least 10 years or more before they finally standardized that, for instance. So, as you say, it is entirely possible that there are pans out there that have from BSR that have some kind of flaw or otherwise seem to be less than acceptable. Let me bring out that S pan again, for instance. This is mentioned as the 3S. And let's take a look here at the handle, for instance. I mean, as you can see, look at this hole here in the handle. It is very rough. It's a very rough cast, in fact, and does not look, it does not look like they took the time to try to smooth it out or anything. Yet, here it is, meaning that it was put out there and was put out for sale, and it ended up here. So that's one example, I guess you could say, of a casting flaw. So perhaps that might be mentioned. That might be the case in your case as well. So, Jamie McLaughlin, I love that my butter pat pans are hand etched with the number. I'm not sure are they still doing that. I do not really have any information about that. I mean, I've seen butter pat pans. Yes, I have no inside information. I really have not hung out with butter pat users any more than the ones in the cast iron cooking group. I've never communicated with them, so I really don't have any information about that. A fine assortment of BSR. I would be happy with his discards. Yes, good for you, William Hurt, and I don't blame you at all right there. Waylon Love, I found a lot of them in the Bay Area. Wouldn't know why, or just have an idea why. Well, what I do know is that BSR did supply a lot of their pans to resellers, other companies who would put their own labels on them and then ship them all over the country. So for all we know, any number of supermarkets, like A&P, for instance, if anybody remembers A&P, in fact, that was just very, very slightly before my time. I only barely remember A&P from when I was a kid. But for example, A&P did have a nationwide network. They were the Walmart of the 50s and probably even the 60s. So say, for instance, if A&P bought pans in mass, they could very well have shipped those all over the country. And so a number of them could have ended up in the Bay Area, for instance, with a completely different logo and not saying BSR or Atlanta Stove Works. And so you could very well have, that may be one reason why there are a lot of pans out there in your area, even though you're in California and BSR was in Atlanta, yeah, Alabama. Anyway, should I remove the protruding heat ring to make proper contact with the inductive cooktop? I would say not, for a couple of reasons. One is that I am very much against grinding down cast iron pans. I do feel that there is a risk involved with grinding a pan that you could end up damaging the pan and maybe even cracking it. It's a small risk, yes, but I do feel that risk is there. And I do not know enough about induction cooking, even though I'd love to know if the fact that the less of the pan contacts the cooking surface, to know whether that would actually affect cooking with it. I do not have enough information about that. And quite frankly, if you're concerned about that, I might suggest looking for a modern day large skillet for use with a induction pan for precisely that reason. Buke Lloyd, I've just inherited some of my great grandmother's cast iron. I'm completely new. I have what seems to be a single notch Lodge 3 skillet. The 3 is backwards, upside down, upwards, up. What's with that? I've seen some of those. The lodge collectors groups actually have seen a few of those over the last several years. So your pan, believe it or not, is actually not unique. There are others out there that have been produced with that pattern. I think there's an argument going on, in fact, as to whether or not that was a genuine lodge, or it might have been, again, a recast where some company may have taken a lodge pan and used it as a pattern for it. I mean, it's really hard to be absolutely certain because, again, those kind of records have been lost over time. I mean, Lodge, for instance, has had at least 2 major fires at their offices, which have, as a result, a lot of their production records have been lost, and so it's nearly impossible, really, to positively identify things like that. It all comes down really to theory and estimated guesses. So. I'm not a collector of vintage, but I am so in awe of those that do. Well, you never know. I mean, again, it's entirely possible you could come across a nice looking old pan at a flea market. That can certainly happen. A fair number of these I found at flea markets over time. I mean, I've been doing this for like the past 10 years now, and I am certainly much more hardcore into looking for cast iron than most casual users. So, Papa Dan, obtained from my mother a BSR number 5 Red Mountain skillet that was cast out of shape. It has a handwritten number, so it is an older one. Seen another BSR that was cast out of shape in an antique store. Well, that's certainly possible. I'm hoping it doesn't mean that pan may have been damaged by fire at some point in the past. Somewhere around here, I've got a Wagner that is definitely fire damaged, to the point where it not only doesn't only sit flat, it actually is oval shaped rather than circular shaped on the top. I suspect it may have been counterfeit or something. Thanks. Well, it could be, but I'll say again, counterfeiting really is not the right word for a lot of these. That's why we call them recasts. I mean, counterfeit would be when people deliberately, say, take a pan and scratch the Griswold mark on it, especially to rip off collectors and try to make money off of it that way. A recast, on the other hand, would be a company just taking somebody else's pan and using it as a pattern to produce their own cast iron pans. Is it copyright infringement? Maybe. It could very well be. Of course, BSR isn't around anymore to enforce the copyright, so not much that can be done about that. And again, as I said, for most companies anyway, these pans here are considered to be throwaways. They're considered to be expendable, or they're just plain cheap. And it probably would not have been worth it, really, to do some kind of a lawsuit on it and saying, hey, look at this. They took our cheap pans and are using them to make their own cheap pans. Probably would have cost more just to do the lawsuit. So, but anyway, as I mentioned, we're still in the BSR era here, and we're already, more than the Red Mountain era into here, and we're already more than halfway into this. Let me bring out one thing at least that is not mentioned much, and I have shown this off a couple of times before. No, it's not Captain America's shield. Rather, this is a very unusual BSR piece that I happened to stumble across. Was one of those things on eBay where I felt I actually was getting a good deal with it. Let me show this quickly because I have talked a little bit about BSR's camp ovens and their outdoor cookware. They produced far fewer of these than they produced their kitchen cookware, and even so, this is a very unusual size, 13 rather than 12, 14, 10, and so forth. In their earliest days, they did produce pans of just about every size, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, even 13 and 14. But even so, I mean, this is so rare that I'm not sure if I'm ever going to find a BSR camp oven or a spider that will ever fit this. So I do use it though with another pan, but nonetheless, that's the other thing. BSR did produce camp ovens and even spiders. And I do have a BSR spider, but it's on top of my shelf. And well, because of my arm, I can't bring it down right now. However, if you do look on the internet, you will find pictures of actual cast iron spiders made by BSR. The outdoor cookware, sadly, is not compatible with the indoor cookware in that a camp oven lid from BSR, or a lid from BSR for their camp oven, will not fit on any of their cookware, unfortunately, and it's sad, but that's the case. Their kitchen cookware had more unusual sizes, like 10.5 inches, or even 8. What's this say? Oh yeah, here, let me show you. For instance, 6 and 3/8 inches, for instance, for the Century series, whereas their camp ovens were on a much more exact measurement, in that this one here, let me put this back here again, so that this lid here is exactly, or just about exactly, 13 inches in size. What I did find is that the inside has a ridge that is exactly 1 inch smaller, and that this is a 12-inch ridge on the inside here. Anyway, that's one of the things that even on eBay, they don't mention these things very much. That BSR did, in fact, produce camp ovens and spiders. And they were producing spiders all the way up to the 1970s and the 1980s, for instance. And there's the thing. If you go onto eBay, you will find a fair number of so-called cowboy skillets or Civil War chuck wagon, three-legged camp ovens or skillets from the 19th century, and they will always say that, even though especially where BSR is concerned, they could very well be selling a BSR spider that's maybe about 100 years more new than what they're trying to sell it for. So yet another reason why I don't like buying cast iron on eBay. But yes, I'll say one other thing. The BSR Red Mountain series camp ovens are extremely rare. I mean, we're talking really, really rare. I mean, maybe even on the line of some of the more famous rare pieces, like the Wapik Indian head, or possibly even the Griswold. Well, I don't know if the Griswold spider, Erie spider, is quite that. I mean, if the camp ovens are quite as rare as that, but nonetheless, I've only seen one single photo of a BSR Red Mountain camp oven. BSR discontinued them by the time the 1940s came around or so. So yeah, they are extremely rare. When they expanded their production in the 60s with the Century series, they reintroduced their camp ovens and skillets, and there are quite a few more BSR camp ovens from the Century era. Anyway, we are still in the Red Mountain series, although we're getting down to the point, I think. Oh, well, let me just do one last Red Mountain thing, and this is also something that's actually very common, and you can find it just about anywhere, and that, of course, would be a cornbread pan. nice thing about collecting these cornbread pans is that every manufacturer seems to have their own unique handle for it, and it makes it very, very easy to identify. I mean, if you see one with a handle like this, it's almost certainly BSR. So if you want to grab it, you can do so. In this case, the only difference between the Red Mountain and the Century series was just that. The Red Mountains used, again, here like a handwritten style here. But they could very well have been producing this handwritten all the way up through their Red Mountain era. I'm not sure if they even produced the standard numbers for it. They actually produced 4 different sizes of these cornbread pans, and I have yet to find the other sizes, which is too bad because there is a 7L for large series of the cornbread cornbread pan that is probably almost half again as big as that one. One of the other BSR YouTubers, the guy who goes by the name of cast iron cookware on his channel, he actually has a very nice collection of BSR, and he has one of those larger cornbread pans, so that was nice. Corn stick pans, you're right. Abstruse mousse. I like the BSR corn stick pan the best because those ears are easy to grasp with your oven mitts. Oh, yes. And then, of course, we can get into the Handy Dan corn stick pan, which they produced just a few years before they went out of business. William Hurt, I have a BSR number 10 camp oven. Oh, congratulations. I use it with pride. I mean, yeah, definitely. That is something to be proud of then. And when it says number 10, as I'm sure you know, what that means is that it's about 10 inches in diameter. Unfortunately, it's not the same as a number 10 kitchen Dutch oven, which a number 10 kitchen Dutch oven is more like about 12 or maybe even 13 inches wide. Pardon me. But the number 10 camp oven is obviously get a lot of use out of it, and well, use it with pride. So James McLaughlin, I know that you strip your pans outside in a tub. Can you reuse that solution? Definitely. That's one of the great things about using a lye tank to strip and clean old cast iron pan. Lye tanks are wonderful because they're literally a set it and forget it. When I'm out collecting cast iron, well, I broke down my lye tank because it's winter now, but when I'm out collecting cast iron and I find an old piece, typically I take it and just drop it in the lye tank and forget about it. Then maybe a month, maybe 2 months later, I fish it out of the tank and clean it up and season it, and it's good to go. That's one of the great things about having a lye tank. It's really, really easy to use for that reason. What is a corn pan with an H1? H1, I would suspect that might be a lodge. I would really say look at the handle. As I mentioned, those corn stick pans, they all of the manufacturers gave their corn stick pans different handles, and that actually makes them much easier to identify. Somebody says Waypock. No. Yeah, I never did know what the actual pronunciation of that was. I was of the impression it was Wapik, because, correct me if I'm wrong here, I believe the actual city is called Wapakoneta, I think, but I'm not sure. I've never been there. William Hurt, I goofed. It's a 12. Oh, well, that's a nice goof. Having a nice 12-inch Dutch oven means you could do a lot of outdoor cooking with that. So I can only say again, I mean, have fun using it. If the corns are all the same direction as well, probably lodge. Yeah, that's almost certainly the case as well. BSR, their corn stick pans, they're actually the corn rows are reversed. I just realized I'm off topic. I'll email later. Not to worry. Not to worry. I mean, there's plenty of time. Okay, so we've pretty much gone through the Red Mountain series here. I'm trying to see what else we may have mentioned here. I mentioned their stoves. I mentioned the Sportsman grill. I mentioned their camp ovens, including their very, very rare Red Mountain camp ovens. BSR even made some huge cauldrons in their early days, their Red Mountain days. 2 designs of them. If you look up the BSR catalog, oh, that's another reason why you should go to that BSR Facebook group, because in the files there, the users of the group have scanned in some original BSR catalogs from their Red Mountain days and their Century days, and that has helped us to learn a lot about their older Red Mountain cookware. That's how we know, for instance, that they produced 2 models of their huge cauldrons, easily the size of those big cauldrons we see today. The rounded ones on top, apparently, they call them English kettles, whereas the ones that are just plain oval shaped, they call them sugar kettles, because obviously that was how they made it. What about the little skillet beside your stove? Oh yeah, let me bring those things up here. Funny thing about these are also very common. I think BSR mostly made these during their Century series, but I could be wrong. They may have been producing them even as early as the Red Mountain days. And that, of course, would be the, let me do this one. The ashtray skillets, which I'm sure a lot of people remember these from, again, their parents' days and grandparents' days, because, you know, a lot of people smoked. They still smoke. But again, that's another subject. I have vague memories of visiting relatives, uncles, aunts, and they did indeed have one of these, usually in the living room, where they used it as an ashtray, and they rested a cigarette in this groove here in the center. And yes, these were in fact made, the ones with this design were in fact made by BSR, and they did a nice little business with that. Apparently, all they had to do was put little letters on the mold, on the pattern of the mold, and so they'd be able to easily and cheaply put a whole bunch of these and send them out. And that's why a lot of companies had these things, and they either gave them away or maybe sold them at dirt cheap prices, because as far as they were concerned, they were ashtrays. Really great for advertising. And of course, being cast iron, hey, they last forever. And this is the other one that I have from a very famous store here in Massachusetts, Spags, which apparently had a really good reputation, because every time I show this, somebody always says, "Oh, I remember Spags." Yes, indeed. There were no bags at Spags. Anyway, it was this particular design with the groove in the handle that identifies it as BSR. On the other hand, I'm not sure if BSR made this one, because I don't think I've ever seen any other one from BSR with this design. In fact, this looks more like what they were making at Wagner more than anything else, except that this is very deep. I think it's deeper than most of those Wagner ashtrays, in fact. However, I was very pleased to come across this one at Brimfield, and so, of course, there was no way I could pass it up. Let me show the handle as well. The handle, I think, also is... I'm not sure if it was actually designed to have these 2 little holes in it, or if that may have been just another casting flaw. Anyway, the difference, of course, is in those days, these were made as ashtrays. When the 90s came around or so, and smoking no longer was fashionable, even though people smoke, you know, it's considered less respectable now. They slightly changed the design of their ashtray skillets, and now they call them spoon rests. Okay, I'm infected with the cast iron bug, still new. Well, congratulations, MH. Welcome to the worst place in the world for it. There is a guide to cornstick identification you can find online, but based on what you're saying, probably made by Lodge. Yes, exactly. The easiest way to tell is to look at the handle. That's the best I can say there. Anyway, we've gone this far, and we haven't even gotten into the Century series. So let me do one last thing, and then we'll go into the Century series. And that, of course, would be lids. BSR in their red... Well, this is another reason, though. BSR lids are very easy to identify because in their Red Mountain days, their lids had these very random little dimples here on the top, and they're meant with the same reason why Lodge put those spikes on their underside. You know, they're meant for condensation, and they did. During the Red Mountain days, they actually did these by hand. So yeah, there actually was a guy on a machine that would just punch these little divots in these lids at random. Boy, I'm sure that was an exciting job. But nonetheless, that's why they're at random. And of course, you can say no two were ever alike. And when they went into automated production, then they standardized those. However, again, that certainly helps to make it easy to identify a BSR lid. And lids in general are often pretty rare, and pretty much anytime you come across a stray lid, it's a good idea to snatch it up. Let me see. Okay, having done all this, as I did mention a little earlier, it was in 1957, and there are actually records of that year. 1957, BSR decided to completely rename their brands. So that they discontinued the Red Mountain series and began the Century Cookware series. And I will say again, the pans produced in the early Century days were exactly the same. There's no difference at all. They literally just stopped making labels that said Red Mountain and started putting labels saying Century Cookware on their pans. Sorry, had an itch there. Because of this thing, it's hard to scratch an itch. Oh boy. Yeah, having an arm like this, really makes me realizes, among other things, of things that we take for granted, like, for instance, being able to take a shower and reach certain parts of your body, like my back. Please, no, get your mind out of the gutter. That's what I mean. I mean, being able to scratch my back in the shower. So, but anyway, yes, it was done for marketing purposes, to try to increase their sales. And so they called it Century Cookware because it's meant to last a century. And so from there until the end of their lifespan, they were producing Century Cookware, which, as I said, for about the first 10 years or so, it looked exactly the same. They just had different labels on it. And unless anybody comes across a Red Mountain pan with a Century Cookware label, there is no way to tell which were the older Century or newer Red Mountain series. Because of this, most people just assume that pans with those markings are from the Red Mountain days. And then again, it was in 1966 that BSR did the massive overhaul of their production facility, and they installed a whole bunch of more modernized production equipment, which, again, the term is DISA, D-I-S-A. I do not remember what it stands for. I'm not that much of an expert, but you can look it up on the internet. Anyway, it really was for automated production, so that a lot of things they were doing by hand, now they could do automatically. And this vastly increased their output. They were able to produce pans at a much greater rate. And it was at that time that they greatly expanded their lines. They started producing a whole bunch of new pans with different designs that they had not produced in the past. And that's why there are a lot of these newer BSR pans that are only from the Century series, because again, they produced them then really to see what would sell and what would not. And let me, if you'll be kind enough to hold tight for a moment, let me dig out one other one here. Oh, good, it's right here on top. That's not too hard. Ugh. Thank you for your patience, as always. I'm being as fast as I can. Yeah. Here it is. Damn it. Always one more thing. Thank you. Anyway, here is one example of the newer pans that they were producing in the Century era. the square skillet. And as I said, they tried a whole bunch of different designs to see what would sell and what would not. I mean, we had the square skillet, we had a bigger square skillet, the breakfast skillet, for instance. And a number of those newer pans had a somewhat different handle. So if you come across a pan with a handle that looks like this, it's almost certainly BSR. Modern day Chinese pans, yes, they do have the curved handle like this, but the design of the handle is not exactly the same. There are differences. The BSR, as you can see, they had an oval shape. The handle still has a ridge on the bottom. Gotta be careful there. Has a ridge on the bottom, just like their other ones. I mean, it is longer, thinner, and it's curved, but this still is a handle shape where you can identify it as being BSR. And it's a good thing too, because this particular pan is completely blank. That was an interesting find indeed. Almost all of their pans, even in the Century series, did have markings on the bottom, but a very few of them, as we found out, did not. And we think that meant they were just simply production flaws. For whatever reason, somebody simply forgot to put the markings on the pattern, and it ended up with some pans being made with completely blank undersides. Not many, but some. Of course, even though that you might consider this to be rare, there's no way I would be able to sell this at an antique mall for like $150 or $200. It's unfortunately not that kind of rare. It's not really a collector's item, but it's nice to own. So BSR is James Crow. BSR is a stout, well-built pan. They knew how to make some badass utensils as well. Oh, yeah, I can definitely agree with that. Do you find Red Mountain weighs less than Century? I should really compare the two and find out. I would think quite possibly yes, because again, they completely used new equipment with their newer production, and it may very well be that they had to completely redesign the patterns in their Century era, and so it's likely, in fact, that especially because it was done automatically with a little less finesse that you would have had with making them by hand, they were probably able to do just that, make them faster, and they were probably a little bit thicker and heavier, as you say. They were also a little rougher too, and that is another point of contention. In fact, let's go to let's bring this one up here. Here is a 1970s BSR number 3, and this way we can demonstrate a couple of things. Number one, of course, is the Made in USA mark, which we've talked a lot about, and I even did a video on that sometime within the last month or so. That it was after 1967 they started marking most, not all, but most of their pans with the Made in USA mark. Meanwhile, during the 1970s, they also added additional markings to their pans here, which is why the Century series, yes, it does have the famous NO number 3 on it, but also starting in the mid-1970s or so, they also used these mold ID numbers here on the bottom, and that's why this one here says 1H2, which apparently means that it was the second pan from pattern number 2 to come from mold number 1H. So that's really what these markings stand for, and that can identify this as being like later 1970s, maybe even 1980s. Nice thing about this one, though, is it has a very nice swirl pattern here for when this pan was ground down here. A lot of people find these, blur. Okay, a lot of people find these to be very attractive, those swirl marks, and I can certainly agree with that. Anyway, that's a very quick summary of how things changed between the 1960s and 1970s, because BSR went through some very rapid changes during that period of about 15 to 20 years or so. Sean Caldwell, the only rare skillet I have is a number 12 Sydney. We were surprised that I found it cheap. Oh, congratulations to you then. Yes, if it says Sydney, that would have been from the very, very earliest days before even they merged with Wagner. So we've got to be talking like maybe 1890s or possibly even earlier. We haven't even talked about screw pans yet. No, we have not. I do not have a screw pan on me. But again, the best I could say is look it up. What we do know, and I'm sure a number of people have seen a pan out there, especially from BSR. A couple of other companies did it as well. You see a mark on the bottom of the pan that looks like a screw. And that was actually done as a form of quality control. No, there is no actual screw in the pan, and no, it's not going to leak. Somebody actually made a joke about that. It's like, well, what it means is that you've got to be sure that that screw is nice and tight. Otherwise, it'll leak when you cook with it. But yes, the screw mark was put on there again as a sort of quality control. If during production they started noticing pans with flaws, they would have to track down those problems with the molds. And so one of the ways they did that was to actually put a print of the head of a screw in the bottom of a pan to identify the precise molds where those pans were coming from. And so if they saw a number of pans with the screw mark and those pans were also flawed in some way or another, maybe they were cracked or had bubbles on them or something, they knew it was a bad pattern or mold rather, and it was time to get rid of that one and produce a new mold in its place. Of course, that also meant that a number of those pans with the screw mark passed the quality control, and so they ended up out there on the market. So yes, that is why there are pans out there with that little screw mark indentation. Pardon me. They are meant for quality control purposes, and they are interesting little pieces in themselves. So, William Hurd, as a BSR man myself, it sounds like you have a fine collection of BSR cookware. Congrats. Is that a 1 quart with a lid? Oh yes, let me bring that one up as well. They did actually produce these during the Red Mountain era and continued it into the Century era. Here, let's take a look at that one. This is a BSR saucepan. And the best way to identify BSR is, again, just because they use these particular markings on it. They use QT for quart to identify it's actually a 2 quart, not a 1 quart. But that's how you could tell that this was actually a BSR. They also, their handles did not have the ridge on them. They did have these very long hanging handles on them, though. But I understand that some of the older Lodge saucepans are often confused with BSR for having similar shape on the handle here. This is definitely a Century Series one, though, for that reason, because of the way the markings are. My website does actually have details about that. I've got a part of my website which has photos of the older and the newer Red Mountain and the Century Series BSR saucepans here. So yeah, I love this saucepan and I've done a lot of cooking with it. Let's also bring up the lid here. And you can see the number 2 for the 2 quart mark on it here. So, and interestingly enough, this lid actually has a handle on it. Over time, I believe it was, well, no, it was almost certainly after the dies, after the automated production went into place, BSR started producing a number of their lids with the little tab on it instead of an actual handle, and that was done again to save costs. It was a real money saver when they started producing those lids with the tab with the tiny hole in it. Now, a lot of people don't like those tabs. I don't like those tabs. I find they're very inconvenient, but They did it as a cost-saving measure, and so that's why they had those tabs there. They didn't do it with the skillet lids because the skillet lids were good sellers, but their saucepans, for instance, did not sell as much as the skillets, and neither did their camp ovens, and that's why the saucepan lids in the camp ovens had the tabs on them instead. I have a 1 quart. Congratulations. Yes. I have multiple BSR skillets with screw marks and find it gives them character. Yeah, that's definitely something you can say about it. And I'll say again, the screw mark was only meant really just to identify it. I mean, it's not a sign of bad quality. It's meant they were looking for bad quality. And with any luck, the one you had was not one of them. What designs of older cast iron pans post have proved useful even in today's construction of new pans? Well, I would say the good old skillet is still as popular as always. I mean, for instance, the newer cast iron makers like Field and Butter Pat and all the rest, they still base their skillets on the older vintage design. Although a lot of them do like the helping handle or lifting handle at the end that Lodge put on theirs. BSR did that with their larger skillets as well, especially the 12 and the 14. So I have elf ear 2 quart flat bottom with lid. 2 quarts. Flat bottom with lid. The BSR saucepans did not have pour spouts. On the other hand, they did in the Red Mountain series. They did use their skillet lids for the saucepans. In the Century days, they produced lids especially for the saucepans, round lids. BSR was ahead of their time, I think. Yeah, they were very, very practical. And I guess now speaking of practical, I guess now is the time to mention probably the most famous and popular pan in BSR's history. I mean, and they are the one who invented this one. I'm sure you probably know which one I'm talking about. It was in their Century series. The Cornbread skillet. Speaking of popular and being ahead of, or practical and being ahead of their time here. So yes, this is the BSR Cornbread skillet, and this is in fact a patent pending one, which is not as rare as I originally thought it was. I have a bit of a personal liking for this particular pan because it was introduced in the year I was born, 1967. The story goes, and I'll be brief, was that one of the manufacturer or floor managers or something, his wife had the idea of making a pan like that, a cornbread pan with those with the wedges in it, and he presented it to the company. And at first, they were not interested, but finally, especially because BSR's production had increased so much that they could do things like this, they could do experiments like this, they finally agreed to make him happy, and they designed the cornbread skillet like that, and sold it to see what happened. And the thing just plain took off. It skyrocketed. The sales of the cornbread skillet were phenomenal. Former employees of BSR say that this thing was the best seller in their entire history. It's like pretty much it was really as if they had struck gold with that pan. I mean, everybody was buying the cornbread skillet in those days. So much so that there are the other companies like Lodge and even Wagner and even the Chinese makers, they started making their own cornbread skillets in imitation of that. And really, the cornbread skillet is so popular that they're still producing it today. The patent pending bit on the pan was because BSR, they never did get a patent on it, as far as I know. But they put the marking patent pending, meaning that we have a patent coming for it, in order to discourage the competition from making their own cornbread skillets. it didn't work. So Lodge produced one, and Wagner produced one, and again the Chinese makers produced one. And when BSR realized that, after several years of production, they finally said, bleep it. And they changed the marking on the cornbread skillet from patent pending to the made in USA that they were marking all of the rest of their pans with. So anyway, yeah, so that, as I said, because of that, I had a special affinity for the cornbread pan, and even to the point where I actually got one with the original label attached. And after a short time, the label fell out of the pan. I had the label framed, and I have it here somewhere. It was just a little tiny triangular thing, really nothing special about it. It's really just sentimental to me more than anything else. But anyway, yeah, the BSR, the 8-wedge cornbread pan, that was invented by BSR. And when BSR passed their designs on to Lodge at the end of their when they went bankrupt, they did so in order to settle their debts with Lodge. The cornbread skillet, well, no, not exactly. It's not like Lodge started producing their own cornbread skillets. They were producing their own cornbread skillet, and they call it the wedge pan, and they still make it today. They call it the Lodge wedge pan. It's wedge skillet or wedge pan, but yeah, they don't say cornbread because that would have been a copyright violation. So even though they have the design of the cornbread skillet, they've never really produced a cornbread skillet. They just call it their wedge pan, and that's how it goes. But yeah, cornbread does seem to have been part of BSR's legacy right from the beginning, because they did those corn stick pans, and they did the cornbread pan, and of course, let me bring out that other piece as well that BSR introduced just before the end of their lifespan, and I've got to be careful. Yeah, I don't want to hurt my wrist here. Here it is. And I've shown this once or twice as well. Oof. The Handy Dan cornstick pan. Handy Dan, I don't believe it was actually named after the guy who designed this. Oh yeah, in fact, the guy who designed this, Hugh Rushing, in fact, he is on the BSR cookware group, and he has posted photos of the original prototype of that, in which they actually took a cornbread cornstick pan, split it in half, and welded a handle onto it, which again is similar to their newer handles that they did with their, as I mentioned, with some of their Century Series pans, such as this square skillet. So anyway, they got the idea of putting a handle onto this. And in the last few years of their existence, they introduced the Handy Dan cornstick pan. It unfortunately it wasn't enough to save the company from bankruptcy. So regrettably, it faded away when the company went out of business, which is a shame, because it is a very useful pan. I mean, having a handle on it really, really makes it easy to use that for making cornbread. So I think it's a really great idea, and I would like to see some other company come out with one of those, because it was a great pan. And that's the reason why, even though it was only out for a few years and it's relatively new, from the late 1980s, that Handy Dan cornstick pan now is a collector's item, which means, of course, you can only find it on eBay for an arm and a leg now. We're talking, what, $100 or more for this thing? No, I would not pay $100 for the Handy Dan cornstick pan. If you are really, really, really into baking, maybe you might. But no, I got that. I managed to score that as a really nice deal I got. What size Dutch oven? Rick Hartke. I located a Dutch oven with lid, Red Mountain, I think, at a local antique shop for $40. If you have found a Red Mountain Dutch oven for $40, no, I would say that is not overpriced. However, check it for cracks. That's the big thing. Make sure it is not cracked. Also, check to see if it's really too bad of a spinner. quite a few of the larger BSR pans, unfortunately, were spinners. And that includes things like my big Dutch oven and even Stumpy, my number 14. I'd love to bring out Stumpy, but as I said, I can't really lift him right now. Well, if you want, although on the other hand, you have seen Stumpy in quite a few of those videos. So, oh, okay. Well, thank you very much. Jamie is offering to take out old Stumpy here. So, well, no, he's not too heavy. I will say that. Okay. Yeah. All right. There we go. Okay. Well, anyway, yeah. Okay, there it is. There he is. Yeah, here he is. There is Stumpy. This is the number 14 Century series. Interestingly enough, if you look at the back, it only has a 14, just like the old Red Mountain markings. However, it's definitely a Century. It has a Made in USA mark, and also the Century series, they use a very skinny number font, much smaller than the one of the. Actually, yes, we could see it very well. So don't worry, your hat keeps you anonymous too. So yeah, yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and okay, thank you very much. Yeah. No, that's okay. Thank you so much for all your help. And the thing especially about the number 12 and the number 14 skillets, because they were so big, even during the Century series, they still used, yes, we're good. You're clear. Even in the Century series, they continue using the old Red Mountain patterns and molds for several years. So quite a few of those earlier Century series number 12 and number 14 skillets still only have the size number. They don't have the number NO the way the later ones did. Dean Reed, Dutch oven size number 8 most common, but other sizes rare, thus worth more. $40, yeah, I would call it a good buy, although I would still insist that it has the lid. I mean, it's arguable if $40 would be worth it for a number 8 BSR Dutch oven with no lid. With a lid, I would certainly say yes. So, did you get a We Can Do It? Yes, I did, and that was the Lodge pan that they produced last year. What oil are you finding works best for seasoning pans? I've heard coconut, grapeseed, etc. What do you find works best? I use a combination of Crisco and beeswax myself. I still have a number of sticks from Crisby, the cast iron seasoning. I know that Buzzy Wax seems to be the thing for seasoning cast iron these days, and that's quite frankly the same thing. It's really a combination of beeswax and I think vegetable oil or shortening. So either way, I like using that for seasoning my cast iron. So also things like avocado oil or coconut oil or grapeseed oil, I'm sure it would work just fine for seasoning cast iron, but really that's kind of expensive when you consider it. I mean, quite frankly, I have no problem with using cheap oils for seasoning cast iron, because the whole point is it all burns on anyway. You just burn a layer of seasoning onto it. Boy, we're an hour and 20 minutes into this thing, and I'm just talking on and on and on here. Good educational and enjoyable show. Subscribers, thank you for working under limited circumstances. Well, yeah, I know, but hey, what can you do? I appreciate everybody for showing up. So, but I mean, God, I've gone on and on here, and I still feel like I could talk even more. But I mean, as I said, we have been at this now for an hour and 20 minutes already, and it is unfortunately a work night. So, but nonetheless, I'm hoping still we covered a couple of topics about BSR that they don't talk about very much. I think I'll end this, in fact, talking about one other topic, and that was when they went out of business, because they actually had a new name for the company then. Remember how I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I talked about how it started out as Atlanta Stove Works, and Atlanta Stove Works produced stoves. Then they spun off Birmingham Stove Range, especially to produce cookware for that. Atlanta Stove Works, they actually merged their foundries with the Birmingham location something like around 1957 or so. The Atlanta foundry closed down, and it was at that single foundry in Birmingham that Atlanta Stove Works and Birmingham both produced stoves as well as cast iron cookware. Atlanta Stove Works was the parent company. During the 1970s, though, after the initial boom that BSR experienced at the beginning of the energy crisis, they started going in the other direction as the energy crisis country moved past it, and they find that their revenue was dropping pretty quickly, and so they had to make some drastic business decisions in those days. So in the late 1970s, BSR completely restructured. That's the word. They restructured their entire company. During that time, Martin Stove and Range, which was no longer producing cast iron, and they were called Martin Industries. They were making mostly heaters, and they bought out the stove business and heater business of Atlanta Stove Works. So they actually were moved completely into Martin Industries. There was no more Atlanta Stove Works and no more stoves coming from Atlanta Stove Works. The BSR cookware business, on the other hand, was spun off completely into a brand new company. The official name of the company was called A&B Foundry, which stood for Atlanta and Birmingham. But that was the official name of the company. But they continued to produce their cookware under the name of Birmingham Stove and Range. They also produced cookware as well with a label that simply said Atlanta on it, but it was still the same thing. It was still cookware from Birmingham Stove and Range. So officially they were A&B Foundry, but they were still producing cookware as Birmingham Stove and Range. Things got really tight though, and then it was in the 1991, maybe even 89. I'd forget but the point is, only a year or two before the end of their existence, they made one very bad business decision that ended up ruining their business. They decided to outsource their production. They made a deal with another foundry, and no, it was not Lodge Cast Iron. I am not apologizing for Lodge Cast Iron. I'm simply saying they made a deal with a different foundry. I think they were called something like Robinson Foundry, there in the Birmingham area, to produce their cast iron. And they moved. Oh, excuse me, about to sneeze. Sorry, had to sneeze there. Anyway, they made a deal and to outsource their cast iron production completely because, they were getting into pretty desperate times there. They moved all of their production equipment out of their foundry and essentially shut down their Birmingham foundry completely. Then the business deal went bad. And I don't know the details of it because I'm not a former employee of Birmingham Stove and Range, but the business deal went down the tubes and they never got their equipment back. They found they were a company without any equipment. For a brief period of time, they made a deal with Lodge Cast Iron to distribute their existing equipment. My understanding is Lodge never did produce cast iron for BSR. I know in the beginning of several years back, I think even I said for a while Lodge produced their cookware. That actually was not true. They never produced their cookware for BSR. They distributed BSR's existing cookware. That lasted only about a year or so, at which point then BSR finally had to declare bankruptcy and they went out of business. And it was during this time that they ran into their debts with Lodge, that they settled their debts with Lodge by passing on or as part of it anyway, they passed on their designs for their cookware, especially the Sportsman grill, the Cornbread skillet, and probably their other pans as well, of which, as we know, Lodge really only produces the Sportsman grill. For a brief time, Lodge did produce the fish fryer that went with the grill, the deep fryer, but but they discontinued that as well. So now, today, Birmingham Stove Range, unfortunately, is gone, not forgotten, thanks to the internet. The only piece of actual BSR production being made now is the Lodge Sportsman Grill, which still uses the same name, the Sportsman Grill that BSR used. Lodge produces their own cornbread skillet, which they call the wedge pan, and continue to do so. But as you know, that BSR cookware, it's out there, and it can easily be found. You may stumble across it at flea markets, or maybe even at antique malls, or who knows where, but it's still out there, and it's still likely, and it's still not really that hard to find. And this is, of course, has been the cookware that many people have had in their kitchens, and you folks watching right now, quite a few of you probably have at least one of those pans there in your kitchen, at which point I guess all we could say is keep on using it, and use it with pride, because hey, what can you say? BSR was an American company. You know, they had their shares of ups and downs, and they were not perfect. They were not angels. You know, they started out doing things like hiring prison labor, for instance, and I'm sure they treated their workers, you know, the way a lot of big companies treat their workers. And yet, they did produce some really good quality cookware, at least until until they finally could not keep up with the times. Dean Reddy, Dutch oven. No, we heard that part already. So new to the live stream. Well, thank you very much. I bet my bad number 8 came from Robinson. Maybe. I wouldn't have any way to know to confirm that. I have a Lodge fish fryer. What do you think the value is? That is actually selling pretty good these days. The Lodge fish fryer. I'd say I've seen it on eBay with prices going over $200 to $300. I consider eBay to be vastly overpriced, and I would consider a fair price to be about 1/3 of the eBay price, which means, hey, we're still talking like about $100 there, so that's not bad. What is on the table for next week? Well, next week, on one hand, I was thinking maybe of looking into the history of Lodge cast iron, because, you know, I mean, Lodge, yeah, everybody has Lodge. Lodge is still making pans today. Their older cast iron, though, I'm thinking really that there's a lot of details about their older cast iron that is not commonly well known. Lodge collectors can tell you a lot of things, like about the single notch Lodge, for instance, or even the older Lodge, which may or may not have been Blacklock, as well as the other pieces produced by Lodge. So we may very well look at Lodge next week, and we can just go from there. Cast iron forever pans. Yes, they will always be wanted in the best of cooks. Oh, definitely. I mean, cast iron will always be with us because it is so useful. That's really more than anything else, even if it is just a niche market now. A niche market that has really exploded over the past 10 years or so, and I am enjoying every bit of it. And I can only hope everybody else here is as well. But, I mean, especially since we've gone on for an hour and a half, really, I'm getting tired. And I can only appreciate everybody once again for showing up. As I mentioned, I'm going to do another talk next week for Cast Iron Wednesday. I am really getting tired of this thing, but I have no choice but to put up with it at least for another 3 weeks or so. I'm also going to be committing myself, in addition to doing Cast Iron Wednesday, I'm going to be committing myself as well to really practicing making cast iron pizzas. I'm going to try to do at least one pizza every week, and I don't know yet, but hopefully I might do it so that every Friday night will be pizza night. And yes, I do want to try to make it live, but that's not yet. Nonetheless, though, do you have an Instagram? I do, and I barely use it. My Facebook page, on the other hand, I use every day. I have a personal Facebook page, which I call Cast Iron Chaos. And that's really more for me, for my personal use, in that I do a lot, I do my cooking, I promote my YouTube videos there, as well as talk about other things there. And then, of course, there's the Cast Iron Cooking Group, which I'm very, very proud of and still enjoy every day. So, of course, the Cast Iron Cooking Group now with 380,000 members on it, it's not really about me, but it's about everyone. And that's the good thing about that group. I mean, go join the Cast Iron Cooking Group on Facebook, show off your cooking in cast iron, and have fun. That's really what it's all about more than anything else. All right. Yeah, would love to have more lodge information. Yeah, I think we will. Okay, I think we will commit ourselves to doing lodge next week. And having said that, I think we're about done here. And hey, the live feed did not lock up this time. Yeah. Oh yeah. Thank goodness. All right. Anyway, that's a good way to end this. Thank you once again for everyone for showing up. As I said, these live chats are a lot of fun. I really enjoy this, and I really hope you do too. So on that, I guess all I can say now is once again, see you all next Wednesday. Have a good evening.